Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Build. I'm David Washington. I'm a program manager on the user experience team. I've worked on the Windows shell for over 5 years. I'm joined by Marcus Mielke.
Hello, everyone.
Marcus works on web platform, and he's worked on web technologies for over 10 years, starting with IE5. Marcus is also an active member of the W3C. We're honored to be here today with you to talk about how you can reach all of your customers' devices by building one beautiful HTML5 user interface. We're humbled to be here on behalf of all of the dozens of engineers back home whose work we represent. Windows 8 is really a reimagining of the PC, from the chip to the interface. And a Windows 8-based PC scales to a variety of screen sizes and pixel densities, from a tablet or a laptop or convertible, all the way up to a desktop. And this breadth of hardware choice is unique to Windows and our point of view, and it's core to how we see Windows evolving in the future. Really, the most exciting thing is that your apps will power the experience on hundreds of millions of PCs. There are 3 things that we're going to talk about today. 1, screen size. How do applications scale to different screens, from laptops to desktops and tablets? 2, we're going to talk about Snap and Portrait. Windows 8 supports new views for the widescreen and tablet form factor that your applications can take advantage of. And 3, we're going to talk about pixel density. Windows 8 supports higher pixel densities than any other release of Windows, and applications can look beautiful on 1080p HD tablets. First of all, why do you care? Why are you going to stick around, and why are you going to invest the time in these 3 things? 1, for screen size, there are hundreds of millions of potential screens that your application can run on. Obviously, you could design it just for a tablet or just for a laptop, but making an application that supports the diversity of screens that Windows supports is just an amazing opportunity. Also, if you scale to larger screens, there are scenarios where you can bring in more content and have more productivity scenarios than you would otherwise. For Snap, multitasking is in the DNA of Windows. And if you create a great snapped view, then users will keep your app open all day as they're multitasking between other applications. For both Snap and Portrait, creating great views here will earn you higher ratings in the store. And for pixel density, when people take home that new high-end 1080p tablet and they run your apps on it and it looks beautiful and crisp, they're going to blog and tweet and Facebook about how great your app looks. And really the exciting thing is that Windows 8 has been engineered to make it easy for developers to build these 3 things into their applications, all by using HTML5 and web technologies that we're familiar with. And Marcus is going to show us how to do that. I'm going to start off by talking about the user experience, and we're going to go through the semantics of each of these things. And then we're going to bring Marcus up here, and he's going to show us how to build it all, and we're going to write some code. It's going to be a lot of fun. One thing to note, we probably won't have time at the end for questions, but we will be available outside, and we'll be at the booth, the app booth, immediately after too. So if you want to come by and talk to us, that's totally fine. So first, user experience. For screen sizes, Windows 8 supports a variety of screen sizes. Tablets laptops, desktops. And as the screen size increases, applications should continue to be as immersive as possible and make use of that added space. Just like Jensen said yesterday, applications can make use of every pixel of the screen. There isn't any Windows Chrome popping in. So the opportunity there is to make use of that space. The minimum resolution of a Metro-style app is 1024 by 768. If the resolution is any lower, we won't launch the app. This is also the size of your application if another app is snapped next to it. And we'll talk a little bit about Snap in a minute. We chose this resolution as this is a common size that's designed for on the web. 1366 by 768 on an 11-inch device, like some of the ones I've seen floating around here, is what we call the baseline resolution. If you're going to start designing your application somewhere, this is a good place to start. The tooling, templates, and controls help you start here. This resolution supports all the features of Windows 8, including multitasking with Snap. But it doesn't just stop there, right? Windows 8 will also run on laptops and desktops. Actually, I'm just curious, who here has actually gone and downloaded the bits and installed them onto a laptop yet? Couple. And I know there's a lot of people online, too. Interesting. And as the screen size increases, applications continue to make use of the space. Like in this news app on the laptop, I have 3 rows of news instead of 2 rows on a tablet. Or on a desktop, I still have 3 rows, but I can still see more news because it's a bigger monitor, like this 1920 by 1080 20-inch monitor. All the way up to a 27-inch 2560 by 1600 monitor. And these monitors exist. There's even like a 30-inch one. And applications continue to make use of the space. And obviously, this is a sample application. This is just kind of what we put together. But your application can make use of the space in the way that best makes sense for your app. So the key things to take away here, applications should continue to be as immersive as possible regardless of the screen size or aspect ratio. And it's an opportunity. How are you going to take advantage of that added space? In Windows 8, applications can be resized at any time to the snapped view. And the snapped view is great for multitasking. This is what it's all about, working with 2 applications at the same time. It's always 320 pixels wide, and it's the height of the screen. And because it's this fixed view, what we're finding is that you can target this view and tailor your application to look beautiful while in this constrained multitasking view. And this isn't another app or mode. It's really the same app. It's just a different size. So when you're thinking about your snapped view, we want to think about how we can preserve the context of your application and state and everything, all of the features even that you have in your full view that you have in your snap view, where it's possible. And the idea is, if you have a feature in your application that needs more space, like obviously that will happen sometimes, rather than hiding that feature in Snap, you can actually make yourself bigger if you need more space. But we want to make sure that we only do that in response to a direct user action, because we want to keep the user in control. They just snapped that application. They probably wanted it to be snapped unless they did something that made it bigger. We've already seen a lot of great snapped apps. I know probably as you guys have been playing around with the build, you've seen some of the snap views. And actually, I'm just really excited to see what's possible, with the apps that come. The tablet form factor comes with the ergonomics of being able to hold the device in the way that affords the most comfort. Users will see the portrait view when they rotate a tablet into portrait. And we think of this very similarly to Snap, where it's the same application, it's just a different size. So rather than totally redesigning our application for portrait, how can we think about refining your view to make use of this space? When we've been looking at our applications in portrait, we've been thinking about them as being great for reading and casual consumption scenarios. One thing to note is not all Windows applications will be able to be rotated into the portrait view. Obviously, if you rotate a tablet, you'll see portrait, but many laptops or desktops will never see the portrait view. However, all of them will see landscape. Another thing to keep in mind is if there's something in your layout that if your layout is really tuned for landscape, you can prefer the landscape orientation. And Marcus is going to show you how to do that. Finally, pixel density. I'm really excited about this one. So Windows 8 supports higher pixel densities than any other release of Windows. And for those of you who don't know, pixel density is the number of pixels in a physical area. And as the pixel density increases, the physical sizes of things on screen get smaller. So if we did nothing here, I have a picture up here, if we did nothing, then things would be too small to read or touch on those 1080p 10-inch or 11-inch tablets. But Windows 8 supports these devices, and the ways that it does this is by scaling UI up. Whenever things would be too small to touch or read, Windows 8 will scale all the system and application up, all the system and application UI up to maintain readability and touchability. The added benefit is that since there are more pixels drawing the same content on screen, UI and text is crisper on screen. So things look beautiful. I mean, just think about it for a second. A lot of us have 1080p TVs or desktop monitors. Imagine all of those pixels drawing a layout on something that's the size of the tablet that you're holding there. It's really beautiful stuff. So there are 3 scale percentages baked into Windows 8. 100%, which is really unscaled. That's like the 11-inch devices that we have out there today. And then there is 140%. And this is for a 1920 by 1080 tablet. And then there is 180%. And this is really for future pixel densities. And we chose these scale percentages as they maintain layouts regardless of the pixel density. So yeah, let's bring Marcus up here, and he can actually show us how we can go build it.
Thank you so much, David. So welcome. I'm really excited here to show you how to build a great user experience for the things David just showed you. But first, who in the audience here has worked with web technologies before? Can I just see a raise of hand? Great, it's a great amount. So you guys will appreciate how powerful it is to use standards-based HTML5, CSS, JavaScript to build Windows applications. And now we have that capability here. If you didn't raise your hand, I'm hoping I can show you what a great platform this is and how much you can take advantage of that. So here are 3 points I want you to walk away with as part of this developer section of the talk. For screen sizes, we're offering you 2 approaches. One is adaptive, and the other one is fixed, to have your screen as immersive as possible. For snapped and portrait view, CSS media queries are your friend. They make it very easy to tailor for these specific views. And for pixel density, Windows is doing most of the heavy lifting for you. And if you have image assets, Windows also makes it very easy to load these for the targeted scale factors. So with that keeping in mind, let's start talking about building for screen sizes. As David mentioned, our key goal here is to be as immersive as possible and use as much of the real estate of the screen as we have available. The first approach we want to present to you is an adaptive approach. And here the idea is to start thinking in proportions rather than fixed pixels and bring in more content if you have more real estate available. The second approach is more tailored to games or very highly designed applications. In that case, it doesn't necessarily make more sense to bring in more content if you have larger screens. But here, we would recommend that you scale to fit your application. And we'll show you easy means how to do that with the viewbox control. So when we talk about adaptive or responsive design, we really start having a little paradigm shift from the traditional way of mocking every comms up in your design tool or in the image-based tool, and then just replicate that on the screen. But rather, we want to start thinking in proportions. And this is a very old design technique. So who here in the audience has heard about the golden ratio? I see a couple hands. Or the 1/3 rule in photography. So the idea there is you place your contents based on proportions of your image, screen, canvas, picture, and arrange your content appropriately, not based on physical fixed units. So let me start off writing an application. So I want to build a weather application. When I first probably start with my content in mind. So the content I want to here have, I have some header area, I have a nav section, and I have some content area. Then I design my canvas, so in this case a beautiful background picture, and I start thinking about my wireframe. So in this case I just put down my wireframe. Once I have my wireframe decided, then I can start thinking of where I place my content. So I have my header section up front, navbar left, and then content in the middle. So now is the time to start thinking, if I have more space on my screen, where could I add more content, or where can I be adaptive in nature? Well, the header is just my little logo of my application, so that probably doesn't make much sense to be adaptive. For the navbar section, I'm not getting more navigation items down, but content is a great place to be adaptive. So that's a region which I want to keep fluid in nature. So CSS has great means to help you manage your wireframes and keep them proportional rather than fixed. The first one is called CSS Grid. And the grid, as the name implies, allows you to devise rows. You can set rows and columns, and you can define the height and width in fixed units, but even more importantly, in fractional units. So fractional units takes the available space around the grid control and distributes it over these fractional cells. So if you have a top-level grid defining your application, it can actually take the real estate of the screen size and distribute that over the cells. Also, grid is source order independent. One of the nice things about HTML5 and the programming platform has a very strict separation of content and layout and views. And source order independent means that your content tree, your document tree, can actually stay intact while you change the layout or the positioning of your content via the grid. This becomes very important when we talk about the snap view and on the portrait view later on, because you can just move pieces around without actually touching your document tree. The second tool I want to talk about is called CSS Flexbox. If you're familiar with XAML technology, you might have heard about the stack panel. And Flexbox is exactly the same methodology. It allows you to stack in horizontal or vertical direction. What makes Flexbox so interesting, it has a notion of a flex property. So again, it can distribute available width or available space into your items. So here in the first row, I have 3 buttons, a back, play, and forward button. And you see some available space, some unused space. In the second row, I'm setting the flex property on each of my buttons, and it'll take that available space and equally distribute it over all my items. You can easily see how you can apply that same methodology to a 3-column layout, for example. So when the screen size gets larger, your columns will get larger too. CSS Flexbox is also source order independent like grid, so you can easily move pieces around with CSS Flexbox. So here I want to show you how easy it is to use grid for your application layouts. What I'm doing in the first line, I'm just setting up my grid. I'm using the display property to get it started, and I'm defining a 2x2 grid, whereby the first column is fixed and the second one is fractional, and the same for the rows as well. So this generates a fully adaptive cell in zone 2-2. And once I've set up my grid, I'm just assigning my content into those grid cells, and that's all I need to do. In this case, I'm moving my adaptive cell into the 2-2, and this one is then fully stretchable depending on your screen size. So now let's go back to the application. I've set up my wireframe, I've identified which of my grid is my flexible area. Now I have to start thinking about the content. Because it's not enough that my grid is flexible. My content also needs to react to the available space the grid provides it. In this case, I want to actually bring in more list content or list items. For that, we have actually a great control in the platform. It is called the list view control. The list view control is adaptive in nature. That means it has a little layout manager built in which understands how much space it has in vertical and horizontal direction and will automatically bring in more items if there is more space. The list view can operate in 2 modes. It can operate in grid mode, which means it fills in horizontal and vertical direction, or it can be operated in list view mode. And that way it just fills in vertical direction. And this is very useful for the snap mode because you can take the same layout and just flip a property and have a beautiful layout in snap view as well. So the question is, well, Markus, it's great if you have list items and I can use the list view control, but what if I do with a layout which is not list-based? Well, here I have an example of where I want to show the location of the weather data I'm kind of showing off. And the same principle applies. I'm first defining my grid and make my grid flexible, and then I have to pick which control inside or which content inside take actually advantage of that additional space. So in this case, I chose a Bing map control. So if I have more space, I will actually make more of the map available to my end users, and they can see more, interact more with it. But you could also envision that you might have just an image here and stretch it appropriately. You just to be very conscious, you need to find out the space or the area which can actually take advantage of that additional space. So what about text-based content? Well, the same principle applies. Making the grid adaptive, and then we're using an adaptive control to actually help us with text. In this case, it's CSS multicolumn. So multicolumn is actually smart enough to add more columns if I have more available space. One of the key benefits of the HTML platform is that it actually got built with adaptivity in mind. So if you remember the early days on Netscape and the very early browser days, mostly text-based, and you had some objects intruding, like images, and they're called floaters, and text would always wrap around, even independent of screen size. That is the foundation. That's the history where the web comes from. And you can take advantage of that in your applications. Every control, every image can be also applied percentage values. So it will always stretch to the available space or whatever capabilities you have available. If you use percentages for your controls or images, make sure that you maintain your aspect ratio. And that's actually very easy to do. You just, in the direction you want to grow or shrink, that's the one where you set the percentage, and you keep the other size auto so you can maintain your aspect ratio. As I mentioned before, multi-column is a great tool to deal with text. And I set actually two very simple properties you can set to manipulate how you want to react to more or less space. Column count will always give you that exact number of columns. So if you say column count 3, you always get 3 columns. If you have more space, the columns get bigger. If you have less space, the columns get smaller. Column width, you will get a specific set of width for your columns. If you have more space, you get more columns. If you have less space, you get less columns. Great adaptive control for text. So what about games or really highly designed application, for example, like a comic book reader? There, you cannot really just bring in more content on demand. So here our recommendation is we want to still be as immersive as possible, and we would like to see a scale-to-fit approach. So you still use as much of this pixel screens you have on the screen. And here's an example of that. Here's a game, 5 in a row, and it has a fixed game board, and it really doesn't make sense to add more rows and columns here if I have more space. To help you with that, we have one of our new JavaScript controls called ViewBox. And ViewBox has two big benefits for you. The first one is it will scale to fit, which is great. The second one is it will automatically center the content as well, so you'll be fully as immersive as possible. Since the ViewBox control is a JavaScript control, it's part of your application. And it also has the capability to maintain your aspect ratio. Since it's part of your application, you have also control over the letterboxing. So you can set the right color, so really make it blend nicely with your application's general background. Since ViewBox is a scaling solution, we would recommend, if you have image assets in your application, to provide always twice the size you would normally use for a targeted device. And the reason there is, if you get in a mode where you get stretched out, your images still look as crisp and pristine as they can be. So now let's talk about snapped and portrait. As I mentioned before, CSS media queries are your friend here. CSS media query is a CSS construct which allows you, based on a certain state, you can switch to a different style sheet or to a different layout. And we have added 4 new media queries to the existing set of standards-based media queries. And these 4 are exactly the new view states you encounter in the Windows platform. It is snapped, portrait, fill, and full screen. So with a single property, you can now target these views and just change the layouts on the fly. So besides using CSS media queries, there are a couple other design considerations for snapped. First, as David mentioned, is you only have 320 pixels available in a width direction. So you're rather constrained in what the things you can do. So you most likely will always end up with a single column layout type. If you have a list-based application, as I mentioned previously, most likely you can keep your wireframe intact. Just change it to a single column, switch the list view control from a grid view to a list view, and the list view will automatically take care for you from the horizontal scrolling and panning direction to the vertical scrolling and panning direction. And it will start filling in items at much height you have available. The only thing you might want to consider is, since the list view is driven off of templates, as you've seen yesterday in one of the keynote talks by Kieran, that you change your template size to 320 pixels, so it matches the space. For non-list-based layouts, as I mentioned, you want to go with a single column layout, and if you have more content than you think might fit into the height of the snap state, please ensure that you use the overflow property so we still have a vertical scrolling and panning direction. So we're keeping the user actions always the same. The user actions were snapped always the same. So portrait, it is very similar to landscape and to your landscape design. It's just 9 by 16. So it means your spacing, your horizontal spacing got smaller. So if you're a list-based application, again, you can maintain your wireframe. Here you just might want to pay attention to the margins. So the grid got smaller, the typographic grid, if you've seen that talk. So instead of the 120 pixels, he recommended it. Here we would recommend you get smaller. And you can still use a control as you would use it in the landscape mode. So just more items get automatically filled in vertically, and the scrolling and panning direction is still horizontal. If you build a non-list-based layout, we would recommend that you go to a 2-column-based layout, and again, pay attention to the margins. So you really take advantage of the more narrow space. As David mentioned as part of the user experience section, there's also a means of opting out of portrait. And this we only recommend for game time application where it really makes sense only to take full advantage of that additional width in widescreen. And to get into that mode, it's very simple. You just specify it in your manifest and have a little lines of JavaScript to indicate to the system that you want to opt out. So as you have seen in the development sections yesterday, Alesh demonstrated it and Kiran demonstrated it. Visual Studio has actually a great tool called the simulator, which allows you to test on all these different screen sizes on your desktop machine you're developing on. Which is really powerful. No more Hyper-Vs and all this other thing where you can have to connect to other machines just to test this. You can all do it on your local machine. If you encounter a broken layout, again, CSS media queries are your friend here. You can actually specify the resolution where you see breakages and change your layouts around on the fly to fix whatever seems broken to you. Also, CSS media queries have the notion of a media query event listener. That means you can also hook up JavaScript events to changes of the media queries and actually bring in new content via JavaScript. And if you see any broken constellation, that's a very powerful mechanism. With that, I'd like to bring David back on stage and let's build some application.
Thanks, Marcus. So, I am really excited about the winter and being able to get my snowboard out, get some snowboarding in. I don't know if maybe we've got some skiers or snowboarders out there. So in order to get ready for it, I made this app. And I just need to log in here. And this application lets me see what the snow conditions are going to be before I hit the slopes. So I'm pretty excited about it. I threw it together, and I tried it out on my tablet that I got last night. I'm really excited about it, and I think it's ready to go to the store, and I can make millions. So what do you think?
That app looks really, really great, David. As you might know, I'm really into skiing myself, and I would love to have your application on my desktop so I can, from time to time, sneak while I'm at work what the snow conditions are. And if they're right, I just run out of the office and hit the slopes and go skiing. So do you think it will run fine on my desktop as well?
Yeah, I just coded this up in a coffee shop. I didn't really have any other screens around. Is there any way that I could actually figure out how that would run?
As I mentioned, Visual Studio has this great tool, the simulator. And if you go into the debug section, there you can select the simulator. And now let's give it a run. So here comes up the simulator. As Kiran mentioned, it actually does a remote login session into your own machine. So it's pretty powerful technology. And well, this looks good. At home, I have a 23-inch monitor. Let's change the simulator to that. Let's take a look.
Yep, there it is. Oh.
Would you have expected anything else?
So, yeah, that doesn't really look so good. That background photo is really a nice photo, and I wanted that to really fit the whole screen and be as immersive as possible. And those items are kind of just like floating around. So how would I actually fix this?
Well, let's take a look at your application and see what we can do.
Okay, so Marcus, this is my HTML here. Do you see any issues here?
No, actually HTML looks very clean, and one of the nice things about HTML, as I mentioned before, you can have a clean separation of your content and your styles, and I actually don't see any inline styles in here, so which is really great. So I assume they're all in your style sheet.
Yep.
So let's take a look here. So David, I noticed a couple things. First, your background image, you can hard code it to the size of your device, 1366 by 768. So instead of hard coding it, we would recommend you guys to use, and recommend to you too, the cover property. So there is a single little property which actually automatically takes the background image and stretches it to the size of your device. So it's very simple. And it also maintains aspect ratio. Nice. The next thing I noticed is that AppGrid is your main container, I assume.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, that is also hard-coded to the size of your device. So here I would recommend it to set a height and width of 100%. And here this is a very important point. Because in HTML, per default, if you don't set to height and width 100% and you set a background color, it only will colorize to the size of your content. It will never colorize just to the size of your screen. You need to tell it, hey, always use the size available on the screen, and you do that by telling it use the height and width by 100%.
So yeah, let's actually take a look at this, see if it fixed any bugs here. Nice, okay.
Okay,
that's looking better.
We're getting there.
That photo is filling the screen, but not quite there yet. It looks like those items are still kind of clipped.
Okay, let's take a look what you do. I assume you're using the list view control here?
Yeah, that's the list view.
So let's see where you do your layout of it.
So my list view lives in this app view content mask right here.
Okay, so I noticed you're using absolute positioning here. And one of the drawbacks of absolute positioning is that you're actually taking the content out of the flow. And absolute position always sizes its content independently of the size of your flow or the size of your screen in this case. So instead of using absolute positioning, David, why don't you use a grid?
Okay. So let's see here. Just use the display property and add a grid here. And based on my layout, I have a 4x3 grid. And the first couple columns and rows are fixed, or they also have auto, which is just size to content. And that final cell of the grid, the bottom right corner of it, is adaptive. I'm using one fractional unit.
Okay. So the next step is you would place your content inside the grid cells.
Okay, let's get rid of all this absolute position stuff. It's not going to work for me. Okay, so let's add some new styles that place into the grid. So what I've done is I've taken this list view element and I've assigned it to that bottom right corner of the grid that's adaptive. And I've gone and assigned the margins and the other fixed regions of my layout to other cells of the grid. So should we take a look?
Yep, let's take a look.
All right.
Right, that looks already better.
That's looking better.
So let's switch back to your original resolution. Make sure that still works as well. Great. So that's fantastic.
So that's cool. You could make a whole adaptive layout without using any fixed pixels. That's really cool.
Yep, that was very quick to do. So as I mentioned, I really like to time perfectly the ski condition so I can head out. What about if I have your app constantly running in my snap view, and so I can multitask with other applications and I can always monitor the snow conditions? Why don't we add Snap to your application?
That sounds great. So I assume I need to start a new project and open up a new app or something like that?
No. The beauty of CSS and HTML is you can do everything right in your app, and it's just a couple lines of CSS. So first, we add a media query targeting the snap view.
Okay. So here I've added a media query, and it's just checking to see if the system is in the snapped state. And I've gone and I've restyled that grid that we created for the snapped state. And it's just one column instead of being 4 columns, and it's still 3 rows. And that bottom cell of the grid is a fluid, it's adaptive.
So one good recommendation is, if you use the snapped media query, to also wrap your main content with a media query as well, to targeting the fill and the landscape view. And the reason for that is because we're using two separate grids, and we don't want these grids to accidentally stamp over each other, so we want to keep them nice separated. So let's just wrap them.
That's a good idea. Okay.
And then launch the app.
Cool, so here's my app, and there's a keyboard shortcut for you keyboard enthusiasts. Win period will snap an app. Okay, that looks good.
Well, that looks great. And list view also manually changed its direction, scroll direction for you, so if you can scroll that.
Nice.
Fantastic, great. So that was nice and easy to do. So after a long day of skiing, my legs are really tired. I come home, I see the nice couch. I want to take my cool new tablet I got from Build. I kind of want to lay down, put it in portrait mode, have a nice cup of hot cocoa in one hand, maybe with something special in there, and really relive my day on the slopes. So why don't we add portrait to that view?
Okay, Marcus.
I'm sure you didn't see that one coming. So again, the same cookbook applies. So we add a new media query. This time targeted the portrait. And we're making some slightly tweaks to the grid.
Yeah, it's the same grid as I had in landscape. All I've done is decreased the margins from 120 pixels to 80 pixels because I'm so constrained. And I've gone ahead and I've hidden some of the navigation elements that don't make sense in portrait. So let's take a look at it.
Okay.
So Marcus, how will I actually look at this laptop in portrait? How do I rotate this?
Well, the simulator can help you out with that as well. It also supports portrait and even supports touch, mouse. You can test all the input elements.
Cool.
So here's now the app in portrait. So my couch evening is saved.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, David, for adding that.
Wow, so this is really awesome. We took my fixed app that I threw together in a coffee shop. I didn't look at it on any screens. And then we went and made it adaptive to all the different hundreds of millions of screens out there. And then we added Snap for multitasking and Portrait so you can relax on the couch only in the CSS. That's pretty awesome. That's awesome. That's really cool. So Marcus, maybe you can help me with another thing that I'm working on. I have a game, and I know you like games.
Yes, I do indeed.
It's called 5 in a Row, and it's a basic game here. It lets you place marbles on the board, kind of like Connect 4. Oh, still kind of running in portrait here. Let me put that back. It lets you place marbles on the board, but it's really just a fixed set of bitmaps. I don't know how I would make this adaptive.
Right, as I mentioned before, in this case, you might start off with the same concept. You might have a grid, you still lay out your game board area and your little game stats and the top, but it really doesn't make sense to assign a fluid area here or bring more cells on your game board. So why don't we just wrap everything with a viewbox control and automatically have it scale to fit?
Yeah, right now it just sits up in the upper left-hand corner, so it's not really making use of the space. So we can use the viewbox to make it fill the screen. Okay. So here's my HTML, and all of the game board and game content lives inside of this container div.
So just wrap it with one of our JavaScript. So you start off with a div too, and then you put the data win control property on it, and that points to the viewbox JavaScript control, and the content gets automatically populated through our Vin.js JavaScript library.
And that's it. That's all I had to do.
That's all what you have to do.
Okay, let's rerun that. Cool. So that same game that used to be just fixed up in the upper left-hand corner on desktop monitors is now totally scaled to fit the screen.
Yeah, and automatically centered for you as well.
That's awesome.
So how about you run this application on a device with different aspect ratio?
Oh yeah, that's a good idea, actually. I jumped the gun a little bit. So if that was a 16:9 desktop monitor, but actually my mom has a 12-inch 16:10 laptop. Let's actually look at that.
So here, the viewbox is still doing the right thing. It scales it out, maintains the aspect ratio, and nicely centers the application. But now you see the default background kind of bleeding through. So I'm personally a fan of these old Westerns. Why don't we give it like a nice black letterboxing to give me that movie experience here?
Okay, so like you said before, it's just your background color that's shining through. So I'm just going to change my background color from white to black. And I could change this to whatever color I wanted to, but let's just do black for now. Nice.
Great. So you still look very good, even in different aspect ratios of your application. Of course, you can pick a color which makes more sense for your type of application.
Great. Awesome. So we can make any type of layout, whether it be an adaptive layout that shows more content or a fixed layout, work on multiple screens. That's awesome.
So as a quick recap, we showed you two type applications with different approaches. The Snowwatch, we took an adaptive approach. For 5 in a row, we took the fixed approach. We showed you how to use the grid, how you can take advantage of adaptive controls to actually take advantage of the additional space. We tested it across the simulator and all the different real estate on the same machine. And you saw how easy it was to add snapped and portrait view to your application. Great. So, David, you mentioned pixel density. Do I, as a developer, have to do a lot of work here? Do I have to think about that?
Yeah.
What's in there for me?
So the great news about pixel density is that Windows does most of the heavy lifting for you. So those 3 scale percentages that I was talking about before, those are scaled automatically to all Metro-style applications. And so all of those CSS pixels or CSS units that you're using automatically become device-independent units. So that's great news. The one consideration that we do have is around images, right? So more great news here. If you're using SVG or other CSS primitives, whether it be fonts or rounded corners or whatever they may be, those will scale beautifully regardless of the pixel density. If you're using bitmaps, which a lot of us use, then Windows helps here as well. So Windows will automatically load the right bitmap for the right pixel density scale. So let me show you how this works. If I can get this button to work. There we go. So let's say you have some image tag here, projector.jpg, right? What you do is you just specify it as you would any other image, and then you save out 3 versions of that image, right? Oh, actually, I have a typo here on the slide, but projector.scale-100 or projector.scale-140. And the idea is that Windows will choose the right image automatically without editing your code or your styles. Windows will just choose the right one automatically. So that's really good news. And really, that's it. And so as long as your images look great, whether you're using vector or using JPEGs with this resource loading convention, then your images will look crisp on this new high-end hardware. So let's recap everything that we've talked about. I know we covered a lot of stuff, but let's recap what we've talked through. First, I started off by talking about the user experience on different screen sizes. And as the screen size changes or the aspect ratio changes, your application still has the opportunity to use every pixel of the screen. and continue to be as immersive as possible. For Snap, we can create great multitasking views that keep users engaged all day as they work and multitask between their other applications. And for pixel density, you can make beautiful, crisp applications on 1080p HD tablets and applications that will support the devices of the future.
From the developer experience side, for screen sizes, we showed you two approaches, one adaptive, one fixed, to be as immersive as possible. For Snapped and Portrait, we showed you how easy it is with CSS media queries to target these new views and just changing the layouts on the fly. And for pixel density, how Windows is doing most of the heavy lifting for you. You just need to think about your content, give us the right assets, and we will load them automatically into your application.
Cool. So with that, if you want to dig in deeper to all the stuff that we showed you today, a good place to start are these talks. One, we talked a lot about list view, and my friend Ryan has a great talk where he goes in deep about all the different properties that you can set on list view. Also, there's a talk on the controls right after this one, where you can hear about all of the baked-in controls and what they do automatically for different screen sizes. And another great talk is this one on CSS3 layout techniques. And there we'll dig in deep and show you how you can use grid and flexbox and the other CSS constructs to make adaptive applications that can work on different screens. Also, if you're a XAML developer or you're checking it out, you can look at another talk very similar to this one where we'll walk through everything with a XAML perspective.
We also have great documentation up on the Dev Center, which goes into more detail. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to send us questions to the forums. Given the time, we probably will be outside, or as David mentioned, at the booth. And we were very excited and very honored to show you how you can build for screen sizes with HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript within a single application. Thank you very much.
Thank you.